What if the work we do isn't separate from the lives we lead, but deeply shaped by them? I'm Andrew Soren, and today on Meaningful Work Matters, I'm joined by Dr. T.L. Boyd, Assistant Professor in Management and Leadership at the M.J. Neely School of Business at Texas Christian University. In this episode, T.L. explores how caregiving, especially in its non-traditional forms, can transform our understanding of meaningful work. He shares his research and personal insights that reveal how responsibilities outside the workplace can deepen resilience, empathy, and leadership. We also look at what organizations and managers can do a better job of to support caregivers and reframe caregiving not as a burden, but as a vital asset. Join us for a rich and eye-opening conversation about where work ends and life begins. Welcome to the Meaningful Work Matters podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Soren, founder of Eudaimonic by Design. On this podcast, we'll dive into the world of meaningful work, explore its complexities, and examine its impact on people and the organizations they're a part of. Each episode features insightful conversations with cutting-edge experts who are successfully navigating the challenges of meaningful work. We hope to offer you ideas, frameworks, and tools to unlock potential and design work that's fulfilling, impactful, and supports everyone's well-being. Subscribe or follow us now, and let's make meaningful work matter. T.L. Boyd, it is a wonderful thing to be able to have you on the Meaningful Work Matters podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I suspect we're going to get into a pretty wide-ranging conversation today about topics that are often silent in a meaningful work context, which is largely about what happens to a certain extent outside of work that is really meaningful work that we basically just totally ignore. Specifically, we're going to be talking about caregiving, and you've just written, along with some others, a pretty incredible paper around non-traditional caregiving, and so I'm really excited to be able to have that kind of conversation today.
And again, I am ready to have this conversation. One of the things that I do with my work is trying to shed light on the hidden.
Well, let's jump right in. Maybe you can start by just telling listeners, what do you want them to know about you and what makes your work meaningful?
My name is T.L. Boyd. I'm an assistant professor at Texas Christian University in the Neely School of Business. My work really focuses on historically decentered and marginalized populations. I strongly believe in the best research is me search. So really taking that mirror, looking inside. You can't tell from my voice, maybe, but I am a 6'2 3/4" Black man, right? Uh, and so I think about, although I have these intersecting identities where I'm able to walk in some spaces of privilege, in other cases I'm not. How can I take stories like mine, people that I know, really looking at my friends as they're navigating situations, my family as they go through things? How can I take these stories and really bring that to the academic space? So again, looking at women, people of color, people with disabilities, non-traditional caregivers, right? Anybody who might fall outside of that conventional mindset or narrative.
I'm so excited for this conversation for so many reasons. But one of them is because I think that we often talk about work as if work is separate than life.
Mhm.
We use terms like work-life balance or work-life integration or work-life, harmony. All these things which suggest that there's a line between work and life. And I think that your research really does a beautiful job of intentionally blurring that line. And you just talked about kind of revealing the invisible, and I like yeah. So so I think this is like the starting point of this conversation is probably just to make visible this thing that we just kind of walk over all the time.
Mhm.
So how do you think that we should rethink what actually counts as work when we think
Mm.
about things like meaningful work?
I think work in the traditional sense, and especially from not even just like an academic piece, but like as we're going to work, we have this exchange mentality where, we're going to our 9 to 5s. We are expected to put in ABC and we know we get X, Y, Z in return. So it's a very one-to-one ratio. But as we're reconceptualizing what work is, I think it's okay to have this exchange idea, but understanding that some of the work that we do, especially meaningful work, won't have that same rate of return. It won't have that same immediacy, if you will. So, you can expect your salary every 2 weeks, every month. But when it comes to meaningful work, the things that we're doing with intention and purpose and true desire because we like to do it, the returns are actually greater. The rate might be a little bit different, but we get paid in a more meaningful way. It's more enriching. And again, that research aspect or the me search within the research that I'm doing, if I only looked at work as I write this article with the expectation that it gets published and hopefully I'll get tenure, question mark. But if I think about it, what are the narratives that I'm telling? What are the stories that are manifesting as I'm thinking about what I'm doing and why I'm personally interested in it? I find that much more enriching. I find that to be much more enlightening because I am able to put my passion into things. I'm able to see what the long term benefit will be. I don't have to use this boundary of, all right, once I leave from work, I'm now at home, my work follows me. I'm not always sitting and writing. I'm just thinking about the world in a more critical way and a different lens. I take stories from my friends. One friend in particular, she has a son. He is a preteen, so he's at that interesting age, but he is on the autism spectrum. And I think about how resilient she is, how she has moved heaven and earth to make sure her son gets the accommodations that he needs in school. I have another friend who is essentially the primary caretaker for her younger brother who has Down syndrome and her mother who has physical disabilities, and how she's able to really be resilient in spite of these things. She still shows up for work, but her experiences at home really make it more it makes her more empathetic in the work that she does. It makes her more resilient, for sure, and more hopeful overall. As we reconceptualize work, to get rid of the boundaries, we have to recognize and embrace that the lines will be blurred. It'll be a bit unstructured, and that's okay because meaningful work, from my perspective, isn't what we're prescribed or assigned to do. It's really just taking this active and intentional step towards the purpose of what we want to do.
I don't have kids. I do have parents. My mom had a really bad fall earlier this year, and it meant that I had to be in a role of a caregiver for the first time
Mhm.
in a very, very long time. It was such an interesting experience. I had a whole bunch of conversations with my father at the time who started to just I mean, he was really in the role of a primary caregiver in that particular situation, and I was kind of there to help out and support. But a lot of that reality was that his work, our work in those specific moments, were really about caregiving in a way that I still had to do the rest of my job. It totally changed. It totally changed the nature of what work meant in that specific moment.
Mhm.
And it was probably around the same period of time that I was reading your paper. And you start that paper by just kind of grounding folks in, how important caregiving is in our lives and how we just take it for granted. We don't even notice it in the work. So give us like a sense as to like how many people are thinking about caregiving generally, like when they're at work.
Let's say 3 out of every 4 are really thinking about caregiving as they're in work because caregiving takes on so many different shapes and forms. You have your more conventional mothers and fathers, and so they're thinking about, did my kid get out to school okay? Are they having a good day? But in your case, where you have a parent who is experiencing some difficulty, you're taking that into work with you. If you're, let's say, getting ready to adopt, and you're thinking like, did I get all my paperwork together? I may have responsibilities for my nephews, for whatever the case may be, right? But so many people are thinking about caregiving, but the reality is like there's not a badge that we wear that shows that we're a caregiver. There's not something in our workplace that says that really designates us as a caregiver. But we bring that identity, we bring those thoughts and that responsibility with us. but we're unable to let it affect our work. So we're juggling many different things all at the same time. I'm getting the research done while also thinking about what do I have to do outside of this, making sure that I can't really let any one area slip because they're both important. But the identity as a caregiver is always going to be present.
You articulate in this paper that, like, yes, you've just described kind of caregiving writ large, but then on top of that, there's all sorts of these other kind of intersectional forms of caregiving. I guess we could describe it, these non-traditional forms of caregiving, and you kind of you take four of them as kind of major pieces: kind of impairment, marginalization, atypical structures, temporality. Can you just like explain a little bit about like what does non-traditional caregiving mean, and like how can we think about that in different ways?
We think about caregiving in the traditional sense or the conventional sense as two parents, typically in a heteronormative relationship, these two parents with one or more children. And both the parents and the child or the children, they are healthy, they are well adjusted, all of these type of things, right? So two parents, nuclear household, one or more children. The American dream, if you will. 2.5 kids and a picket fence. But when it comes to non-traditional caregiving, what about the single parent, the father who was recently widowed? What about that same-sex couple who's been looking to adopt? Very true reality is, as the world is aging, our parents are getting older, we have responsibilities. I was talking to my siblings, like, "Yeah, we have aging parents." So, like, right now, they're still very much so able to do everything themselves, but it's one of those things that comes to mind. So from a non-traditional sense, anybody who does not fit into this societally stereotypical idea of what a parent or a caregiver is, people who have those extra role responsibilities, they step outside of the norm. We don't really see them represented in media, but we know that they're
Let's kind of keep on this kind of question about norms, because I think that one of the things that becomes so important in the work that you've done is about trying to name and articulate like what are the social norms and prejudices that that get totally erased as we think about this kind of work. And I want to like I again just want to emphasize. I think all of this is work. It's just work that we don't ever consider as part of our work, but it's in some ways the work that is often the most meaningful in our lives. Anyways, how do the social norms and prejudices like impact this non-traditional caregiving?
So social norms and prejudices are definitely inherent in the definition and just like how we think about a caregiver. We may see like let's say a young woman who we know is a single mother. We might think that, hmm, how does she become a single mother? It was it some fault of her own? Why doesn't she have a man? Why isn't the child's father present? Right. So we have these preconceived notions of who she is or what her life circumstances are. We know nothing about her other than what we're thinking. From a work standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, we may look her over for a promotion because we think she doesn't have the time to really invest into the workplace. Or we may think that her decisions aren't going to be the most sound because, again, she's raising a child by herself, no man, no father present. But when we think about the work that goes into this, we're dismissing that, yes, while she may be a single mother, the almost like the mental Olympics, the time constraints and organizational structure that's needed in order to make sure that your child or children are properly cared for. The organizational skills that requires, the forethought, the planning that goes into that. All of that is work. Providing, make sure food's on the table, make sure that they are getting from point A to point B, coordinating schedules. It's all work. Now it's meaningful because we do this because we love our children or we love our parents or we love whoever that we're responsible providing care for. It's very possible for these things to spill over into work for this one domain of our life. So, family, caregiving responsibilities to spill over and enrich our ability to do work within the workplace because we are bringing that resilience, bringing that optimism, our increased performance. A lot of the times, like you want to see like someone who should be the CEO of Fortune 500 company, get a mom because of the work that she has to do, and she's able to do it all, and still be a career woman. And take it a step further, get a single mother, right? Or a single father. Get someone who is in what we call the sandwich generation of caring for his or her aging parents as well as young children, all in the same household, right? And so there are many ways this is happening, but we see the work happening in multiple domains, but there's spillover. And I really like to look at it from the family to work spillover.
Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by family to work spillover?
We spend most of our time either at home or at work, right? And so thinking about the directionality of it. Do you have these things, these occurrences that are happening in your home life? So your outside of work life, how are you taking these and how are they affecting your workplace or your ability to perform your role within your organization? Are these positive attributes, primarily if we're looking from this enrichment focus, are these positive attributes that you're taking that you're able to now use in your work? Either intentionally or unintentionally, right? Being more empathetic with that one coworker or that one subordinate who was a little late. You might be able to draw on, you know what? I have a child who's on the spectrum and they had a rough day. And so if you're also having a rough day, my rush to judgment is, oh, I won't rush to judge because I'm going to think about the full aspect of what are you actually experiencing? Let's break this down. Let's communicate more. That is one of those examples of a family to work spillover.
There's something that you've been talking about that I think is just really important to highlight because I think that it so rarely happens in these conversations. You're articulating like all of these positive potentialities that come from the non-traditional caregiving reality. And I mean from my read of the literature, just from my experience in organizations, most of the most of the ways that we think about caregiving are really in a deficit orientation. Like this is something that's taking me away from my work. This is something that's challenging me. It's exhausting me. It's a demand that I kind of can't that I can't be able to just like I either have to just ignore it or I have to try to figure out how can I bring other resources to be able to meet this demand. As opposed to I think that some of the really inspiring things that you're doing is kind of reframing, reshifting that deficit thinking, or at least adding kind of an asset based or a strengths based lens to it. So, help us understand a little bit more about like what do these non traditional forms of caregiving do in terms of their capacity to add growth, to add strengths, to add character building to our work life.
We're not dismissing the deficits of it, right? Because it is a very real, it's a reality that these non-traditional caregivers, they're facing stress just as a more traditional caregiver would, as well as some of the burnout. However, from this enrichment focus, as we think about these negative aspects that happen again, having to coordinate different schedules, being able to find support systems where we may not have initially thought to look at them, right? From this enrichment focus, from an intrapersonal character building aspect, interpersonally with our communication, organizational policies, we think about how can we be more intentional on taking this lemon, right, and essentially making lemonade from it. And one of the, I would say, a more particular one that I resonate or resonates more with me is this resilience aspect. So resilience is the ability to bounce back. With non-traditional caregivers, by and large, especially if they are caregiving for someone with a physical or mental disability, that they are constantly facing situations where it is a negative situation. Um, it's this wall. And so they're seeing it from different perspectives. They are drops in a bucket, learning those skills necessary to overcome the barrier. So when they face it again, that it won't be as big of an issue. That is the essential aspect of adding to the narrative, this enrichment focus. What you might have thought to be a detriment to this employee or to this person, actually, if you look at it from the right perspective and engage in conversations, we're able to see that there are these enriching assets that they can contribute to the organization. We're able to understand that maybe the support systems that we have in place are not really a one size fits all, that there are gaps that we need to actually pinpoint. But by thinking about the enrichment aspect of it, we're opening our eyes to what we've often overlooked, what we just assumed would be okay for everybody, right? But that's not the case.
The fact that the kind of skills, the kind of strengths that we have to use in the context of caregiving, are often things that are impossible to learn on the job, right? But they're often the things that are the most valuable things that we want in our leaders and our individuals. I mean, the capacity to be adaptable, the capacity to be inclusive, the capacity to have empathy. Like these are all things that are central to what it means to be a good caregiver, to be able to do that work, to be a servant leader, to that degree, which are all highly desirable in organizational contexts, and that we spend thousands of dollars sending people on leadership programs to try to learn, when in fact, often the experiences that they're having in their lives might be the very best teachers of those kinds of things.
One of the things too that we discovered as we were going through this exploration, if you will, of non-traditional caregiving was like the unique stressors that non-traditional caregivers really face, but also support and this idea of like motivation, right? The motivating factors, especially, are different for non-traditional caregivers because although sometimes it could be seen as a sense of obligation, like I am taking on this role of a non-traditional caregiver out of obligation, I'm still motivated to do it because I see a need that no one else is able to really feel. Or I see this opportunity for me to step in to really um, take what I'm doing or this passion that I have and make it work for the people that I'm caring for. So like foster caregivers, for example, they are very much so fulfilling the societal need. We might not see it show up in their work, but this is work that they're doing because they're shaping people's lives. And if we think about how does that translate into like the actual workplace, like these characteristics or these qualities that we need, we can have the seminars, the trainings that we want to on inclusive leadership and on empathy and on compassion, right? But until a person lives it, until a person really reconciles or like wrestles with that and understands what does it mean in this capacity or this domain, it's more authentic because we're not fabricating this experience for this workshop, right? This is something that people are actually doing. This is a skill that's needed that we can't really teach. But if we talk to people about these are the things that you're experiencing, like how can we take that and shape it in a different way? That's what people just need. They may not have known that, oh, my identity as a non-traditional caregiver, who would have known that I would actually be really nicely positioned for leadership because of everything that I've experienced. And it will make me more capable of working with this group or that group, right? And so, from a like a practitioner standpoint, if you will, how are we creating opportunities for people to think about their life experiences from a non-traditional caregiving standpoint, and what does it look like translating over into the workplace or even non-work like situations, right? There's community organizations, there are boards you can be a part of, a lot of different things. But the point is, we're creating these spaces for people to think about, yeah, I've had this experience. This is what it could look like.
I'm really curious at how let's kind of follow this practitioner line, because I think it's also like a leadership question. Like, how do we talk about these kinds of things in the context of a workplace or in the context of, volunteer engagement or community organization or placement or anything like that? And one of the things that is just in my head right now as we talk about it is the potential for this to go terribly wrong. And I say that in the spirit of there's all these schools that look and study things like post traumatic growth, right? Like we think often about trauma as something that's going to be like a terrible thing, and that we're going to get like PTSD as after a really traumatic event, and yet just the reality is, as human beings, we often actually bounce back better from trauma. I mean, trauma can be a thing that spawns growth as opposed
Mhm.
to just disaster. And one of the things that we also know from the work that's been done on things like post traumatic growth is that rarely is it a good idea to go to somebody who is experiencing trauma and just assume that they are growing from it, or make someone feel bad because they're not growing from this experience.
Mhm.
So how do we talk about this stuff in a way that that creates the opportunity for people to make meaning from it, to think about it, to explore the ways in which they might be learning and growing without it becoming a gaslighting conversation that says, "Hey, if you're not having a great time learning and becoming an adaptive leader because of, the incredibly like tough work that you're doing at home with non-traditional caregiving, it's your fault."
That is, oh, that's a great question. And I think it would first, in order for it to, like not derail before it even starts, I would say from a practitioner standpoint, it's important to really, again, look introspectively to think about what support systems do we have in place that are for the benefit of these non-traditional caregivers. And so, like, one of the things that we found is that when it comes to like policies and procedures in the workplace for NTCs, is that they are not underutilizing the resources. Is it that they are unaware that the resources exist? And if they are aware, the resources aren't really tailored to their particular needs. To answer your question, I think like that's the first step from a practitioner standpoint. Let's make sure that we have policies, systems, procedures in place that are going to help that surrogate mother or the Jim from accounting who's looking to adopt a child with his partner, right? To make sure that this is in place before we go to them and say, like, well, what are you doing wrong? You're not really growing. Share first, like, okay, this is what we have. Are you aware that we have these particular opportunities or these support systems in place for you? And how are you engaging with those? Are you finding benefit from them, right? So instead of just like putting the burden on a non-traditional caregiver who already has a full plate, I think it is important for practitioners to know first, like, what are we doing to support this community and allowing them to speak of their own experience. It could be like it could be that the situation that, yes, um, I have this incredibly meaningful work that I'm doing outside of this organization that brings me joy. Or it could be, you know what? No, there are situations where I'm trying to figure out, do I show up for work? Because I have a lot that I need to do here. But once they start the ball of sharing their own narrative, I believe the reality is some of this may be a bit one-on-one, one-on-one in certain situations until you get something more programmatic in place. The best thing is just, in a two-step piece, introspect to know what we have, and then second, ask to make sure that they are aware.
I think it's incredibly useful to be able to start this conversation, a conversation with any kind of a caregiver, and especially a non-traditional caregiver, with the assumption that the starting point is like, are we thinking about the systems that we have in place to support this person? Like, what does exist for them, not just generically, but for them, and not to assume that they're going to have time to be an HR business partner themselves and to do all the work that they need to do with their employee assistance program and to even understand what might be available because like the last thing that they do is have time to do any of those kinds of things.
Mhm.
Uh, one of the things that I'm even just thinking about before that is, the reality is, I think that for many bosses or managers or team members or anybody in an organization, the caregiving that might be happening, especially the non traditional caregiving, because of all of the social norms and prejudices and the reasons why somebody might not be fully disclosing what's going on at the office, is going to be invisible. How do we even have the starting point conversation? Like, how do we even open the door to be able to explore what might be going on for people when that work is maybe being intentionally hidden?
It is a part of like the training that supervisors and leaders are getting, right? Or are we encouraging or even requiring, right? This type of supportive behavior training for our supervisors to be able to look for the signs or to navigate a conversation with empathy and with patience. Sometimes at the end, it's just taking a pulse of like who is under your supervision, who's like in your care, right? Because supervisors, for all intents and purposes, are types of caregivers, right? They're responsible for the people that they are working with or who are working with them. And so um, having this type of training for supervisors, to again just to avail themselves to their subordinates, to their followers, to say, or to create that space that I am facing this particular situation. Like I couldn't get a sitter, or my dad, he had a bad fall, and so I need to take time off of work. But when they create that space where people are comfortable coming to them and they know they won't be penalized, because I think that that's some of the hesitation that and reticence to actually disclose, because they think like, oh, well, I'll be devalued or incorrectly evaluated in my workplace if I tell you that I have this going on. But managers who are undergoing training, or organizations that have employee assistance programs in place, transparency, all of these type of things are important. So make sure they're trained. Make sure the supervisors are also aware of what support systems are in place. So that way, if an individual doesn't yet feel comfortable in disclosing, at least they're able to really lay out to say, if a situation does occur, you can come to me, but they have to really put that um, I don't want to say image, because I don't want it to be like a front, if you will. But how can they just put that information and knowledge out there to say, this is what the organization is doing. And as a representative of the organization, I'm here for you. But they have to be properly trained. They have to at least be aware of non-traditional caregiving is a thing. It's beyond mothers and fathers and FMLA and, like maternity and paternity leave, right? There are different configurations.
Yeah, beautiful. So I really do think that there's a key need that I frankly, I mean, I spent a long time working in talent management, leadership development, and I don't think I've ever observed a conversation about how do you explore the caregiving realities of the people that you are working with, both from a leadership perspective as well as from a peer to peer. We spend a lot of time in organizations talking about things like psychological safety and how do we create cultures where people can feel like they can speak up without fear of retaliation.
Mhm.
And I think that often we position that in the context of maybe ethical challenges, or how do I speak up about things that are going wrong in the organization, or bad behavior within the organization. And so rarely do we extend that conversation to be about how do we make space for people to disclose what might be going on outside of the the sandbox that we are defining as quote unquote work.
As it relates to just like managers being more aware, managers are really seen as these climate engineers. So they're the ones setting the pace and the tone for their employees. And so if they are setting the tone to be inclusive, and again, like, even if we step outside of non-traditional caregiving or caregiving more broadly, are they setting this tone for inclusivity, for just like embracing the different, for the things that are more observable? So are they creating opportunities for women, for people of color, right? For people with disabilities? And if we see that, if we see this climate of acceptance, people and inclusion, people are more likely to be more comfortable disclosing. When managers, again, as they're creating this climate of inclusion, to say that, okay, I might have this situation, even if no one else is, let's say, responsible for their parents and their children, at least I know that I can come to my boss or my supervisor, and the supervisor may say, okay, I didn't previously think about this as non-traditional caregiving, but it's a reality, right? And so they're able to co-create this mentality of, how can we broaden and build to understand that different realities actually exist outside of what we typically think about? It's some give and take, but it's definitely some mutual building of understanding that different realities exist. Um, so I guess I am putting it on the employee just a little bit, right? Just being transparent to their level of comfort, right? To say that, this reality does exist. So, and maybe there are other people who are experiencing something similar to me, but disclose to your level of comfortability, and the supervisor can then take that and identify, or at least be more mindful that there are others who could be experiencing something similar.
We spend a lot of time talking about practice and practitioners. Just looking ahead, would you say there's any other ways in which non-traditional caregiving should be entering into the research space? Like, how can we How can we be thinking about this in the way that we're doing research in organizations?
We identified, if you will, these 10 roles, but we know that this is not the most comprehensive understanding of non-traditional caregiving. This is just what's been done currently in research. And so I think from a research standpoint, we have to do a deeper examination, really open dialogues with employees. So this is the practitioner and the researcher who fall into these non-traditional caregiving categories and better understand who may be a non-traditional caregiver. One of the areas that we were thinking about was like pet care, right? There are people, again, like me, I don't have children, but there are some whose lives, if you will, revolve around their pets. There are people who are in these atypical family structures. They may be in a throuple or polyamorous relationship. And so I think of sister wives, I think of like those the family compounds where what does caregiving look like where I have my kid, your kid, and other people's kids, but we're all in this group relationship, if you will. It extends beyond non-traditional caregiving. When we think about how can we really expand our mind to think about what are we experiencing, expecting to be the societal norm? How are we changing the definition of what's normal? If we actually take a look and see that this is far more mainstream or normative than we initially given credit to, we will be able to really look at this more in depthly from a research standpoint, promoting the inclusion aspect of it, appreciating and utilizing the unique character building opportunities from these non-traditional caregivers. I would love to see an exploration of these positive psychology aspects, resilience, hope, compassion, right? What does this look like? Are there differences between non-traditional caregivers who are leaders and maybe more traditional or people who have no caregiving responsibilities? A more systematic exploration of the policies. And are people aware? How are they using them? Does it impact organizational profit? I'm a management scholar, so everything's organizational profit, right? Uh, does this impact performance? But yeah, I think those are some of the ways that we can really think about how we can take forward steps with non-traditional caregiving research, better identify who is involved in non-traditional caregiving, and more intentional explorations of their experiences.
Thank you so much for revealing the invisible today, like shining light on the space that we never talk about. And it's so important to be able to talk about because it impacts all of us to some degree or another. If it's not a primary concern, it probably will be at some point in your working life, to be a caregiver, to be probably non-traditional in the ways even that you're thinking about caregiving. It's a real gift, I think, to shine this spotlight on this topic. Thank you for doing so. If people want to learn more about non-traditional caregiving, where would you suggest they go?
So from a scholar standpoint, I would say, come to me.
Okay. Uh,
No, we could definitely have conversations about like what it does look like from an academic standpoint. But honestly, I would even encourage, let's take this more personal approach, right? Talk to the people around us. We see the people in our workplaces. We see the people in our families who may, fall into the category. You have that coworker who's like who talks about their mom pretty often, right? I'm like, oh, are you a caregiver for them, right? What does that look like? Or, you have another coworker who has a partner with some physical disability, right? So just engaging in these conversations. When we get to know who people are from a more personal standpoint, this makes it more realistic. It makes it more tangible. If they want to talk to me, LinkedIn, email, best way to get in contact with me, read the work. I am happy to share and have any conversations about this.
we will definitely make sure that we link to you and link to it in our show notes. Teal, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a
Thank
true
you.
pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Meaningful Work Matters. If you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And if this episode resonated with you, please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback helps us make this podcast better and reach more listeners. You can connect with me, Andrew Soren, on LinkedIn, or visit www.eubd.ca to learn more about Eudaimonic by Design. Finally, if what you heard today spoke to you, tell your colleagues and people in your community about our podcast. We really appreciate your support in making meaningful work matter. See you next time.